The phone rang at 6:17 in the morning, jolting Nora awake from a dreamless sleep. Something about early morning calls always meant trouble. She fumbled for her cell phone on the nightstand, knocking over a glass of water in the process. The caller, ID, showed an unfamiliar number with the local area code. Her stomach tightened as she answered. "Hello? Is this Mrs. Chen?" A formal male voice asked. "Yes, this is she," Nora replied, her voice still thick with sleep. She sat up in bed. Suddenly, alert. The water from the knocked-over glass was slowly soaking into the carpet, but that was the least of her concerns. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Officer Reynolds with the Oak Ridge Police Department. I'm very sorry to inform you that we found your son, Thomas, unresponsive in his apartment near Westlake University." The world stopped spinning. Nora's ears began to ring, and the officer's voice faded in and out as he continued talking about paramedics and emergency responses. This couldn't be right. Thomas had just called her yesterday to chat about his upcoming exams and how he was planning to come home next weekend to do laundry and raid her fridge. "There must be some mistake," she interrupted. "My son is perfectly healthy. He's only 19. The officer's voice softened. "I understand this is difficult, ma'am. The paramedics suspect it was a cardiac event, but the medical examiner will determine the official cause of death. We need you to come to Memorial Hospital to identify him." Nora hung up the phone and sat motionless for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The puddle of water had spread across the carpet, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Thomas couldn't be dead. Not her boy. Not her only child. For 20 years, Nora had worked as a nurse in the cardiac unit at Oak Ridge General. She'd seen hundreds of heart failure cases, but never in someone as young and healthy as Thomas. He was a runner who watched what he ate and didn't drink or smoke. A cardiac event? It made no medical sense. She finally willed herself to move, mechanically, pulling on clothes and grabbing her purse. Her hands trembled so badly she dropped her car keys twice before making it to the garage. The morning was crisp and clear, mockingly beautiful for such a horrific day. During the 30-minute drive to the hospital, memories flooded her mind. Thomas taking his first steps across the living room. Thomas losing his front teeth and lisping through elementary school concerts. Thomas as a gangly teenager, growing 6 inches in one summer. Thomas hugging her goodbye just last month when she'd dropped off a care package at his apartment. She'd raised him alone after his father walked out when Thomas was only 4. It had been just the two of them against the world. Now, it would be just her. The thought made her chest physically ache. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty this early in the morning. Nora walked through the automatic doors of the emergency department, a place she usually entered with confidence as a medical professional. Today, she was just a mother with a broken heart. "I'm Nora Chen," she told the receptionist, her voice hollow. "I was called about my son, Thomas." The young woman's face immediately softened with recognition. "Yes, Mrs. Chen. Please have a seat. The doctor will be with you shortly." Nora sat rigidly in the waiting room chair, unable to leaf through the outdated magazines or watch the morning news playing softly on the wall-mounted television. Instead, she stared at her hands, noticing with strange detachment that she'd forgotten to remove her gardening nail polish from the weekend. Thomas had always teased her about her dirt hobby, as he called it. A doctor appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Chen?" Nora recognized Dr. Patel, a colleague she'd worked with on several cases over the years. The recognition in his eyes confirmed this wasn't some elaborate mistake. "Nora," he said, using her first name. "I'm so sorry about Thomas. Please, come with me." She followed him through familiar hallways that now seemed alien and threatening. "What happened, Raj?" she asked, desperately clinging to professional detachment. "He's 19 with no cardiac history. It doesn't make sense." Dr. Patel sighed. "Preliminary findings suggest sudden cardiac arrest, but you're right. It's unusual in someone his age with no prior issues. The medical examiner will conduct a full autopsy." They stopped outside a door Nora knew all too well, the hospital morgue. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her. "You don't have to do this now," Dr. Patel said gently. We can arrange for someone to be with you, or you could come back later." "No," Nora said firmly. "I need to see him. I need to see my boy." Inside, the room was cold and sterile. A sheet-covered form lay on the stainless steel table. Nora had seen hundreds of bodies in her nursing career, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The technician slowly folded back the sheet, revealing Thomas's face. He looked peaceful, almost as if he were sleeping, except for the unnatural pallor of his skin. Nora reached out with trembling fingers to touch his cheek. It was cool and firm, nothing like the warm living boy who had inherited her dimples and his father's dark eyebrows. "Yes," she whispered. "That's my son." The next few hours passed in a blur. There were forms to sign and decisions to make. Nora moved through it all like a sleepwalker, answering questions automatically while her mind struggled to accept this new, horrible reality. When she returned home, the morning sun was streaming through the windows. Thomas's childhood photos lined the hallway, a timeline of a life cut short. She touched each frame as she passed, as if she could somehow reach through the glass and pull him back to her. In the kitchen, she found herself mindlessly making 2 cups of tea, one for her and one for Thomas, who wouldn't be coming home ever again. She stared at the extra mug for a long moment before pouring both down the sink. The doorbell rang, startling her. Outside stood Vivian, her next-door neighbor and closest friend. "I just heard," Vivian said, pulling Nora into a tight hug. "I came as soon as I could." Nora broke down then, her professional composure finally crumbling as she sobbed into her friend's shoulder. They moved to the living room where Vivian listened as Nora talked about Thomas, about the call, about how none of it made medical sense. "He was so healthy, Viv," Nora insisted, wiping her eyes. "I'm a cardiac nurse. I know the warning signs. There were none." "Maybe it was something genetic," Vivian suggested gently. "Something that wouldn't have shown up in regular checkups." "Maybe," Nora conceded, but doubt nagged at her. In 20 years of nursing, she'd developed an instinct for when things didn't add up. This didn't add up. Later that afternoon, she called Thomas's roommate, Jin. The poor boy sounded devastated. "I found him when I got back from my morning class," Jin explained, his voice breaking. "I thought he was sleeping in, but when he didn't respond, I called 911 right away, but the paramedics said that he had been gone for hours." "Did anything unusual happen yesterday?" Nora asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Jin paused. "Not really. He was working on some research project, spent hours at the library, said it was important, but he didn't go into details." After hanging up, Nora sat at her kitchen table staring at her phone. Something about this felt wrong. Thomas had always shared his school projects with her, especially anything he considered important. She scrolled through their text messages from the past week. Nothing unusual, except for one cryptic message sent 2 days ago. "Mom, did you ever hear about that scandal at Westlake back in the 90s? The one with the Alumni Association? Might need your advice on something related to it." She had replied asking for details, but Thomas had only answered, "Nothing concrete yet. I'll tell you when I see you this weekend." A weekend that would never come now. As twilight fell, Nora made the most difficult call of her life, to the funeral home. The director was kind and patient, walking her through options she never thought she'd have to consider for her young son. That night, alone in her quiet house, Nora couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Thomas's text, about the research project Jin had mentioned, about the medical impossibility of a healthy 19-year-old dying from sudden cardiac arrest with no prior symptoms. As a nurse, she knew that sometimes tragic, unexplainable things happened. But as a mother, she couldn't accept it. Not yet. Not without answers. She got up and went to Thomas's old bedroom, preserved almost exactly as he'd left it when he moved into the university apartments. Sitting on his bed, she hugged his old teddy bear to her chest. "I'll find out what happened to you," she whispered into the darkness. "I promise." Little did she know that her quest for answers would lead her to a discovery that would stun everyone at her son's funeral, a discovery that would change everything. The next 3 days passed in a fog for Nora. Friends stopped by with casseroles and sympathy. Neighbors offered to mow her lawn, and Thomas's university sent a beautiful flower arrangement with a handwritten note from the dean. None of it felt real. How could the world keep turning when her son was gone? The funeral home called to let her know Thomas's body was ready for viewing. The service was scheduled for Saturday, giving out-of-town relatives time to arrange travel. Nora hadn't wanted to wait that long, but practicality won out over her desperate need for closure. "We've prepared him according to your specifications," Mr. Winters, the funeral director, explained when she arrived. "The closed casket service can proceed as planned." Nora nodded absently, then asked, "May I see him now? Alone?" "Of course," Mr. Winters replied, leading her to a private viewing room. "Take all the time you need." The room was dim and peaceful, with soft music playing from hidden speakers. Thomas lay in an open casket, dressed in the navy suit he'd worn to his high school graduation. He looked like he was sleeping, though something about the stillness was unmistakably different from life. Nora approached slowly, her nurse's instincts suddenly overwhelming her grief. Something caught her eye as she leaned over to touch her son's face. There, partially hidden by the collar of his dress shirt, was a pattern of faint bruising along the side of his neck. Her heart hammered in her chest. She'd examined hundreds of patients during her career. Those marks didn't look like typical post-mortem discoloration. They looked like finger marks, like someone had pressed their hand against Thomas's throat. With trembling fingers, she carefully folded back his collar to get a better look. The bruising pattern continued down toward his shoulder, hidden beneath his clothing. "Mrs. Chen?" Mr. Winters had returned. "Is everything all right?" Nora quickly adjusted Thomas's collar back into place. "Yes," she lied. "Just saying goodbye." That night she couldn't sleep. The image of those bruises haunted her. Why hadn't they been mentioned in the coroner's report? If Thomas had been attacked, how could it have been missed? Early the next morning, she drove to Thomas's apartment near campus. His roommate, Jin, had texted that he would be there packing up some of Thomas's things for her. The apartment was exactly what you'd expect from two college boys. A mixture of textbooks, takeout containers, and laundry that needed doing. Jin's eyes were red-rimmed when he answered the door. "Thanks for coming to help," Nora said, giving the young man a hug. "I know this is hard for you too." Jin nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "I still can't believe he's gone. Just last week, we were planning our spring break trip." They worked in silence for a while, boxing up Thomas's clothes and books. Nora found herself lingering over each item. His favorite hoodie still smelled like him. A coffee mug still had his lip prints on the rim. "Jin," she finally asked, "did Thomas ever mention anyone threatening him? Or did he seem worried about anything?" Jin paused, a stack of textbooks in his arms. Not threatened exactly, but he set the books down and sat on Thomas's bed. "The past few weeks he was working on this research project. It started as an assignment for his investigative journalism class, but I think he found something big." "What kind of something?" Nora pressed. "He was looking into this campus organization, the Westlake Legacy Foundation. It's supposed to be this prestigious alumni group that funds scholarships and buildings and stuff. Thomas discovered some weird financial discrepancies going back years." Jin hesitated. He was being really secretive about it. Said he needed solid evidence before he talked to anyone. Nora's mind flashed to Thomas's cryptic text about a scandal in the 90s. Did he keep his research somewhere? Notes or files? "His laptop," Jin said, "but the police took it as part of their investigation." "What about backups?" "Thomas was always careful about that." Jin's eyes widened. "Actually, yeah, he had this flash drive he kept with him all the time." He jumped up and went to the desk, pulling open drawers. "It's not here. He must have had it with him when it happened." Nora felt a cold certainty settling over her. If Thomas had uncovered something damaging about a powerful campus organization, and if someone had found out, "I need to see his things from that night," she said. "Did the police return his personal effects?" "They gave me a bag yesterday," Jin replied, retrieving a sealed plastic bag from his closet. I was going to bring it to the funeral. Inside were Thomas's wallet, phone, watch, and keys. No flash drive. Was he wearing a jacket that night? Nora asked, an idea forming. Yeah, his gray one with all the pockets. He always wore it when he was working late. Nora searched through Thomas's closet until she found the jacket Jin described. It wasn't in the bag of personal effects, which meant Thomas had been wearing it when he died. Methodically, she checked every pocket, inside and out. In a small, hidden pocket inside the lining, her fingers touched something small and metallic. A tiny flash drive, no bigger than her thumbnail. Her hands shook as she held it up. Do you have his computer password? Jin looked uncomfortable. I shouldn't, but yeah, I do. He made me memorize it in case anything ever happened to him. Said it was just being paranoid, but he trailed off, the implications hanging in the air. Using Jin's laptop, Nora accessed the flash drive. It contained a folder labeled WLF with dozens of files, financial spreadsheets, scanned documents, and interview transcripts. One document caught her eye. Board Members 1995, 2023.pdf. Opening it revealed a list of names, including several she recognized as current university administrators and local business leaders. One name in particular made her blood run cold. Dr. Howard Reynolds, current Dean of Students. 20 years ago, he'd been briefly investigated for financial improprieties before being cleared. The same Dr. Reynolds who had sent such a lovely sympathy note with the flowers. Jin, she asked carefully, did Thomas ever mention Dr. Reynolds? Yeah, actually. He was trying to get an interview with him the day before Jin swallowed hard. The day before he died. Said Reynolds kept dodging his requests. Nora copied all the files to her phone, then returned the flash drive to its hiding place in the jacket. Her mind was racing. None of this proved anything, but combined with the unexplained bruises, it painted a disturbing picture. Back at home, Nora spread the funeral pamphlets across her kitchen table. Thomas's smiling graduation photo looked up at her from each one. Tomorrow, friends and family would gather to say goodbye to a young man whose death made no medical sense. Her phone rang. The funeral home. Mrs. Chen, this is Mr. Winters, just confirming everything's set for tomorrow. As we discussed, it will be a closed casket service. Nora hadn't actually agreed to that, but she'd been so overwhelmed when making arrangements that she might have nodded without really listening. Actually, Mr. Winters, I'd like an open casket. There was a pause. Mrs. Chen, given the circumstances and the procedures that were necessary, I really don't recommend that. A closed casket would be more appropriate. What? Procedures? Nora asked sharply. The medical examiner said it was a routine autopsy. Yes, well, Mr. Winters sounded uncomfortable. There were some additional examinations required. I assure you we've done our best, but I want to see him again, Nora interrupted. Tonight, before the service. That's highly irregular. Mrs. Chen, we're actually closing soon and I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said firmly, ending the call. As she drove to the funeral home, Nora's mind was spinning with possibilities. Additional examinations? What had they found that required further investigation? And why hadn't anyone told her? The funeral home was quiet when she arrived, with only Mr. Winters waiting at the door, looking nervous. Mrs. Chen, I understand your distress, but I must advise against this. We've prepared everything beautifully for tomorrow. Disturbing the arrangements now could. I'm a nurse, Mr. Winters. I've seen death in all its forms. What I need is to say a proper goodbye to my son. Alone. Reluctantly, he led her to the viewing room. 15 minutes, he said. Then we really must close. As soon as he left, Nora moved quickly to the casket. Thomas looked the same as before, peaceful in his navy suit. But this time, she wasn't just going to look. She needed to know what they were hiding. Carefully, she unbuttoned his collar, revealing the bruising she'd noticed earlier. It seemed darker now, more pronounced. Nora took out her phone and snapped several photos from different angles. Then gently, she turned his head slightly to examine the back of his neck. What she saw there made her gasp out loud. a small puncture mark, expertly hidden in his hairline, the kind of mark made by a hypodermic needle. In that moment, Nora knew with absolute certainty that her son hadn't died of natural causes. Someone had killed him. And tomorrow, at his funeral, she was going to make sure everyone knew it. She leaned down and whispered in her son's ear, "I'm going to find out who did this to you, Thomas. I promise." Little did she know that her discovery was just the beginning. The funeral tomorrow would reveal even more shocking truths that would stun everyone in attendance. Nora barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the small puncture mark hidden in her son's hairline. By 5 a.m., she gave up trying to rest and sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, planning what she would do next. The funeral was scheduled for 11 a.m. People would expect her to be a grieving mother, devastated, perhaps barely able to function. And she was devastated. But underneath her grief burned a fierce determination to uncover the truth. She called Detective Wilson, who had been assigned to Thomas's case. The call went to voicemail. "This is Nora Chen. I need to speak with you about my son's death before his funeral today. I found evidence that suggests he didn't die of natural causes. Please call me back as soon as possible." Next, she called Dr. Patel, her colleague from the hospital. "Nora, is everything all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice despite the early hour. "Raj, I need a favor," she said. "Can you attend Thomas's funeral today? And bring your medical kit, the small one you use for home visits." There was a pause. "Of course I'll be there, but why?" "I can't explain right now. Just please come, and don't tell anyone I asked you to bring medical supplies." After hanging up, Nora dressed carefully in a simple black dress. She did her makeup with extra attention, knowing all eyes would be on her today. In her purse, she placed her phone with the photos she'd taken, a copy of the files from Thomas's flash drive, and a small notepad. Her doorbell rang at 9:30. It was Vivian, dressed in black and carrying a casserole dish. "I thought you might need breakfast," she explained, "and moral support." Nora felt a rush of gratitude for her friend. "Actually, I need more than that," she admitted. "I need your help." Over quick bites of egg casserole, Nora explained what she'd discovered: the bruises, the needle mark, the flash drive with Thomas's research. Vivian's eyes widened. "You think someone murdered him? Because of what he found out?" "I don't know for sure," Nora admitted, "but it's too much to be a coincidence. And today I'm going to make sure everyone knows something isn't right." "What can I do?" Vivian asked without hesitation. "During the service, I'm going to approach the casket. Mr. Winters will try to stop me because he knows what I found last night. I need you to create a distraction if that happens." At 10:30, they arrived at the Grace Community Church. The parking lot was already filling up. Thomas had been well liked, and it seemed half the town had come to pay their respects. Nora spotted several professors and many students from Westlake University, including Jin, who gave her a sad wave. Near the entrance stood Dr. Reynolds, the dean of students, talking quietly with another man Nora recognized from Thomas's research. Files, Robert Blackwood, president of the Westlake Legacy Foundation. Nora took a deep breath and approached them. "Thank you for coming," she said, shaking their hands firmly while studying their faces. "Mrs. Chen, our deepest condolences," Dr. Reynolds said smoothly. "Thomas was one of our brightest students, such a tragic loss." "Yes, tragic," Nora agreed, holding his gaze. "He was working on a fascinating research project before he died, about university finances." Something flickered in Reynolds' eyes. Surprise? Concern? But his expression quickly returned to practiced sympathy. "Was he? I wasn't aware. If there's anything we can do to honor his memory, a scholarship perhaps." "That won't be necessary," Nora said coldly, then moved on to greet other mourners. Inside, the church was filled with flowers. Thomas's closed casket sat at the front, surrounded by photos of his life. As a toddler on the beach, playing soccer in middle school, grinning in his high school graduation cap and gown, Mr. Winters approached her nervously. "Mrs. Chen, everything is arranged as planned. If you'd like a moment alone before people are seated." "Thank you," Nora said, walking to the casket. She placed her hand on its polished wood surface. "I'll have more than a moment with him soon," she added quietly. The service began with music. Amazing Grace, one of Thomas's favorites despite not being particularly religious. The pastor spoke about life cut short and the mystery of God's plan. Friends shared memories of Thomas's kindness, his dedication to truth, his silly jokes. Throughout it all, Nora sat in the front row, her back straight, her eyes dry. She spotted Dr. Patel sitting near the back, a small medical bag by his feet. Vivian sat beside her, occasionally squeezing her hand in support. Finally, it was Nora's turn to speak. She approached the podium, looking out at the sea of sad faces. "My son Thomas was my whole world," she began. "For 19 years, it was just the two of us against the world. He was brilliant, kind, and above all, honest. He believed in finding the truth no matter what." She paused, making eye contact with Dr. Reynolds in the third row. "Thomas was in perfect health. As a cardiac nurse for 20 years, I know the signs of heart trouble. There were none." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. This wasn't the usual grieving mother speech they'd expected. "Last night I discovered something about my son's death that disturbed me greatly," she continued. "Something that makes me believe his death was not from natural causes." Mr. Winters stood up from his seat near the casket, alarm clear on his face. Nora walked down from the podium and headed straight for the casket. "Mrs. Chen, please," Mr. Winters said urgently, moving to intercept her. "This isn't appropriate." At that moment, Vivian knocked over a large flower arrangement with a loud crash. As people turned to look, Nora quickly reached the casket and opened it before anyone could stop her. There were gasps and shocked exclamations throughout the church. Opening a casket unexpectedly was jarring enough, but what Nora did next left everyone stunned. With steady hands, she turned Thomas's head slightly to expose the back of his neck. "Dr. Patel," she called out, "as a medical professional, could you please come examine this?" Dr. Patel hurried forward, medical bag in hand. The church had fallen completely silent. "Right here," Nora said, pointing to the small mark hidden in Thomas's hairline. "And here," she added, carefully loosening his collar to reveal the bruising. Dr. Patel leaned in, examining both areas carefully. "This appears to be an injection site," he confirmed, voice carrying in the silent church. "And these contusions are consistent with restraint, not post-mortem discoloration." A woman near the back began to cry. Jin stood up, his face pale with shock. "My son didn't die of a cardiac event," Nora announced, her voice strong despite her trembling hands. "He was murdered, and I believe it was because of what he discovered about the Westlake Legacy Foundation." All eyes turned to Dr. Reynolds and Robert Blackwood, who sat frozen in their seats. "Thomas found financial discrepancies going back decades," Nora continued. "He was seeking an interview with you, Dr. Reynolds, the day before he died." Reynolds stood up abruptly. "This is outrageous. Mrs. Chen, your grief has clearly—" "I have copies of all his research," Nora interrupted. "And now everyone here knows about the injection mark and bruising that were conveniently left out of the coroner's report. How much does it cost to cover up murder these days, Dr. Reynolds?" The church erupted in chaos. Some people moved away from Reynolds and Blackwood as if they were contagious. Others crowded forward to see what Nora had discovered. In the confusion, Blackwood tried to slip out a side door, but was stopped by two men Nora didn't recognize. One of them flashed a badge. "Detective Wilson, Oak Ridge Police, I got your message, Mrs. Chen. This gentleman isn't going anywhere." Everything seemed to happen at once after that. The detective asked everyone to remain calm and stay seated. The pastor tried to restore order. Mr. Winters looked like he might faint. Through it all, Nora stood beside her son's open casket, one hand resting protectively on his shoulder. She had promised him justice, and this was just the beginning. "I'm so sorry to disrupt my son's funeral this way," she told Detective Wilson when he reached her. "But Thomas deserved the truth. He lived for it." You did the right thing, the detective assured her, taking notes as Dr. Patel pointed out the injection site and bruising. We'll need to order a new autopsy immediately. As police officers arrived and began taking statements from shocked mourners, Nora finally allowed herself to cry, not just from grief but from relief. The truth was coming out. Her son's voice would be heard. Jin approached the casket, tears streaming down his face. I can't believe this, he whispered. He told me he was onto something big, but I never thought. None of us did, Nora said, putting an arm around her son's friend. But now everyone knows they won't get away with it. As the church slowly emptied with police directing people where to give their statements, Nora remained by Thomas's side. In exposing the truth, she had disrupted the peaceful goodbye she had planned, but somehow she felt Thomas would have approved. You always said the truth matters more than anything, she whispered to him. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what happened to you, no matter what it takes. Outside, she could see Dr. Reynolds and Robert Blackwood being questioned by police. This was just the beginning of what would surely be a complex investigation. But Nora had done what seemed impossible just days ago. She had found evidence, created witnesses, and ensured her son's death would not be swept under the rug. The day had started with a funeral. It would end with the first steps toward justice. Next morning, Nora woke up on her couch, still wearing yesterday's black dress. She hadn't meant to fall asleep there, but exhaustion had finally overtaken her after the most shocking day of her life. Her phone showed 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. News traveled fast in a small town. She made coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the early light touch her garden. Thomas had helped her plant those rose bushes last spring. Mom, you're burying them too deep, he'd laughed. They need room to breathe. The memory brought fresh tears. Her doorbell rang. Detective Wilson stood on her porch, looking tired but determined. Sorry to come by so early, he said, but things are moving quickly. Nora led him to the kitchen table and poured him coffee. Tell me everything. The medical examiner confirmed what you found, Wilson said. Injection site at the base of the skull, bruising consistent with restraint. Toxicology is rush-ordered, but preliminary findings show traces of a powerful muscle relaxant. The kind that would paralyze someone but leave them conscious. Nora's hand shook, sloshing coffee onto the table. The thought of Thomas aware but unable to move, unable to call for help. We've seized computers and financial records from both Reynolds and Blackwood, Wilson continued. Your son's research gave us enough for search warrants. Reynolds is claiming innocence, saying he never met with Thomas. But Blackwood is already talking, looking for a deal. What did they do? Nora asked. What did Thomas find that was worth killing him for? Wilson pulled out a notepad. Based on your son's files and what we've uncovered so far, it looks like the Westlake Legacy Foundation has been running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme for nearly 30 years. They've stolen millions meant for scholarships and research grants. That's horrible, but worth committing murder? Nora pressed. There's more. Wilson lowered his voice. Thomas found evidence linking the foundation to overseas accounts connected to a private military contractor. We're talking government contracts, weapons development funds, serious money. If this got out, dozens of powerful people would face federal charges. Not just university administrators, but politicians, business leaders. Nora thought of the list of board members in Thomas's files. Names she recognized from local news, even national headlines. So they killed my boy to protect their money. We're going to get them, Wilson promised. All of them. For the next 2 weeks, Nora practically lived at the police station. She pored over Thomas's research, explaining his notes and findings to investigators. Each day brought new revelations as the conspiracy unraveled. Jin became a key witness, recalling conversations and late-night study sessions where Thomas had pieced together the financial puzzle. Together, he and Nora reconstructed Thomas's final days. He told me he had a meeting with someone who could confirm everything, Jin explained during one session. But he wouldn't say who, just that it was Someone on the inside who wanted out. That informant remained a mystery until Detective Wilson burst into the conference room one afternoon, his face flushed with excitement. "We found her," he announced. "Thomas's inside source, Patricia Winters." "Winters?" Nora repeated. "Like the funeral director?" "His daughter. She works in the university's accounting office, been there 15 years. And guess what was on her computer? Copies of the same financial records Thomas had, plus emails between them arranging to meet the night he died. Why didn't she come forward?" Jin asked. "Fear," Wilson said simply. "After Thomas died, she suspected what happened, but was too afraid they'd come after her next. When we showed up with a warrant, she broke down and told us everything." The next day, Nora sat across from Patricia Winters in an interview room. The woman looked nothing like her father, smaller, with nervous hands that constantly adjusted her glasses. "I'm so sorry," Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought they would. I just wanted the stealing to stop." "Tell me what happened," Nora said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I need to know." Patricia took a shaky breath. "I'd been gathering evidence for years. When Thomas started asking questions for his journalism project, I reached out anonymously at first. Then we started meeting in person. He was so smart, connecting dots even I hadn't seen. And the night he died? We were supposed to meet at his apartment at 9. I was bringing the final proof he needed, transfer records showing Reynolds authorizing payments to offshore accounts. But when I got there, her voice broke. 2 men were leaving. I hid in the stairwell. One of them was Blackwood. The other was this big guy I'd never seen before. They were arguing in whispers. I heard Blackwood say, "Did you have to use so much?" And the other guy said something like, "It's done, stop asking questions." Nora closed her eyes, imagining her son alone in his apartment, unable to call for help as the poison took effect. I waited until they were gone, then went to Thomas's door. It was unlocked. I called out, but he didn't answer. I was so scared, I just ran. Patricia's face crumpled with shame. I should have checked on him, called for help. Maybe he could have been saved. The medical examiner says the drug worked very quickly, Detective Wilson said gently. There was nothing you could have done. That night, alone in her house, Nora sat in Thomas's old bedroom surrounded by his things. His high, school trophies, favorite books, the star chart he'd made in 6th grade, memories of a life cut short by greed. Her phone rang. It was Dr. Patel. "Nora, I've been reviewing the toxicology report," he said without preamble. "The substance they used, it's restricted, only available to certain medical and research facilities." "Westlake has a medical school," Nora said. "Yes, but their records show no missing inventory. I checked. But there's a private research lab that works with the university on a government contract. Their security is much looser. Do you have a name?" "Quantum Biophysics. They're connected to that military contractor Detective Wilson mentioned." Nora wrote down the information. "Thank you, Raj. I'll pass this to Wilson tomorrow." But she didn't. Wait until tomorrow. Instead, she started searching online, looking up Quantum Biophysics. Their website was slick but vague, full of stock photos and empty phrases about advancing humanity through scientific innovation. Their leadership page showed a board of directors that included familiar names, including Robert Blackwood, and one other name caught her eye, Dr. Leo Chen, her ex-husband, Thomas's father. The room seemed to spin around her. Leo had walked out when Thomas was 4, moving across the country to focus on his career. He'd kept in sporadic contact, sending birthday cards and occasional checks, but had been largely absent from his son's life. Thomas had tried to reconnect with him in his teens, but Leo had remained distant. Had Leo known? Had he been part of this? With shaking hands, Nora dialed Detective Wilson's number. When he answered, she could barely form the words. "I need you to look into someone else connected to quantum biophysics. Dr. Leo Chen. He was Thomas's father." 2 days later, Nora sat in Wilson's office as he laid out what they'd found. "Dr. Chen has been with Quantum for 12 years. He's their chief research scientist. His specialty is pharmaceutical compounds, including the one used on Thomas. Did he know? Nora whispered. Was he part of it? Wilson spread his hands. We don't have evidence placing him at the scene or connecting him directly to the murder, but his access badge was used to enter the lab storage area the day before Thomas died, and phone records show a call from Blackwood to his private line that same day. I need to see him, Nora said firmly. That's not a good idea during an active investigation. 15 years ago, he walked away from his son without looking back. Now I need to look him in the eye and ask if he knew they were going to kill our boy. Wilson sighed. We're bringing him in for questioning tomorrow. Officially, you can't be there, but I could arrange for you to accidentally cross paths with him in the hallway. The next day, Nora waited in a small conference room at the police station. Through the window, she could see officers coming and going. Then, a familiar figure walked through the main doors, escorted by 2 detectives. Leo looked older, his hair now salt and pepper, but she would have known him anywhere. The same man whose features she'd seen echoed in her son's face for 19 years. As they passed the conference room, Nora stepped into the hallway. Leo stopped short when he saw her. Nora, he said, his voice hoarse. I heard about Thomas. I'm so sorry. She studied his face, looking for any sign that he'd known, that he'd been complicit in their son's death. What she saw was grief and shock, but also fear. Did you know what they were planning? She asked quietly. No, he said immediately. I swear, Nora, I didn't know they would hurt him. I didn't even know he was investigating the foundation until after. But you knew something, she pressed. You knew what they were hiding. Leo looked at the detectives flanking him, then back at Nora. I designed compounds for them, military applications. I never asked questions about the funding. It was classified, they said. His voice broke. If I had known Thomas was in danger, I would have warned him. You have to believe me. Before Nora could respond, Wilson appeared at her elbow. Dr. Chen needs to answer some questions now, he said firmly. We'll let you know what we find out. As they led Leo away, he looked back at Nora one last time. I'll tell them everything I know, he promised. Everything. For Thomas. Nora watched him go, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. Had he been telling the truth? Had he really not known their son was in danger? Or was he just trying to save himself now that the conspiracy was unraveling? The truth was still emerging, piece by painful piece. But one thing was certain. She wouldn't rest until every person connected to Thomas's death was brought to justice, even if one of them was his own father. 6 months passed. Autumn turned to winter, and winter melted into spring. Nora watched. The seasons changed from the courthouse steps, where she sat each day during the trial of those accused of killing her son. The courtroom had become her second home. She knew every crack in the wooden benches, every squeak in the gallery floor. She recognized the scent of the judge's cologne and the bailiff's habit of jingling coins in his pocket during witness testimony. Today was different. Today was the last day. You ready? Detective Wilson asked, sitting beside her with 2 paper cups of coffee. In the month since Thomas's death, the detective had become something close to a friend. I've been ready for this since the day I opened that coffin, Nora replied, accepting the coffee. Its warmth felt good against her palms in the cool morning air. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Journalists scribbled notes while students from Westlake University filled the back rows. The case had grown from a single murder to one of the biggest corruption scandals the state had ever seen. At the defense table sat Dr. Reynolds, Robert Blackwood, and Edward Costas, the muscle who had actually injected Thomas with the lethal compound. All 3 men wore suits that seemed to hang more loosely on their frames than when the trial began. Nora took her usual seat in the front row. Behind her, Jin and Vivian slipped into their places like a practiced routine. They had been her pillars throughout this ordeal. All rise, called the bailiff as Judge Hernandez entered the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, took her seat and surveyed the courtroom before speaking. This court will now deliver verdicts in case number 2025 CR 178, the People versus Reynolds, Blackwood, and Costas. The air seemed to thicken as the judge unfolded a document. On the count of first-degree murder, the jury finds the defendant, Robert Blackwood, guilty. A soft gasp rippled through the courtroom. Blackwood's shoulders slumped. On the count of first-degree murder, the jury finds the defendant, Edward Costas, guilty. Costas remained stonily silent, staring straight ahead. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, the jury finds the defendant, Howard Reynolds, guilty. Nora closed her eyes briefly, feeling a complex wave of emotions wash over her. Not joy. Nothing about this brought joy. But a sense of rightness, of order restored to a world that had been horribly upended. The defendants will remain in custody until sentencing, Judge Hernandez continued. This court is adjourned. The sharp crack of the gavel seemed to release something in Nora's chest. She had held herself together for so long, through the investigation, the preliminary hearings, the endless parade of witnesses. Now, as people began filing out of the courtroom, she let the tears come. Vivian wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "They can't hurt anyone else now," she said softly. Outside, reporters clustered on the courthouse steps, microphones extended, like hungry birds. Detective Wilson helped create a path through them, but Nora stopped. "I'll make a statement," she told him. She had prepared for this moment. The reporters quieted as she approached their microphones. "Today, justice was served for my son Thomas," she began. "But this case was always about more than one young man's life. It was about truth. Thomas believed in uncovering the truth no matter how powerful the people hiding it. In the end, he gave his life for that belief." She paused, gathering her strength. The conspiracy Thomas uncovered stole millions meant to help students. It corrupted our university system and betrayed public trust. Today's verdict sends a message that no one is above the law. Not university deans, not wealthy donors, not government contractors. A reporter called out, "Mrs. Chen, what about your ex-husband's involvement? Dr. Leo Chen received a reduced sentence for his testimony. How do you feel about that?" The question stung, but Nora had expected it. Dr. Chen made choices I cannot defend. He looked the other way while others committed crimes, and he designed the compound that killed our son. However, his testimony was crucial in bringing down the entire network. The judge and prosecutors determined his cooperation warranted consideration. What she didn't say was how those private conversations with Leo had torn her apart. His tearful explanations. His claims that he never knew their son was the target. His insistence that he'd been threatened into silence after Thomas died. In the end, he'd pled guilty to lesser charges and would serve 5 years. Whether she believed or forgave him was a different matter entirely. Another reporter raised her hand. "What happens now with the Westlake Legacy Foundation?" "The foundation has been dissolved," Nora replied. "Its remaining legitimate assets will fund a new scholarship program, the Thomas Chen Memorial Scholarship for Investigative Journalism." She stepped back from the microphones, suddenly exhausted. "That's all for now, thank you." Detective Wilson drove her home. The house felt different now, less empty, though Thomas was still gone. Pictures of him still lined the hallway, but she'd added new ones. Thomas laughing with Jin, Thomas at his high school graduation, Thomas as a toddler playing in a pile of autumn leaves. "What will you do now?" Wilson asked as he walked her to the door. Nora looked at the envelope she'd been carrying all day, waiting for the verdict before opening it. "Start something new," she said. After Wilson left, Nora made tea and sat at her kitchen table. She opened the envelope and spread out the papers inside. Application forms for a forensic nursing certification program. In the months since Thomas's death, she had discovered strengths she never knew she had. Her medical background, combined with her newfound understanding of criminal investigations, had sparked an idea. She could help other families find the truth when loved ones died under suspicious circumstances. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Jin holding a small box. "I found this while cleaning out the rest of Thomas's things from our apartment," he explained, setting the box on the table. "Thought you should have it." Inside was a leather-bound journal Nora had never seen before. Thomas's handwriting filled its pages, notes, ideas, sketches for stories he wanted to write. He was always scribbling in this thing, Jin said it was for his future book. Nora ran her fingers over her son's handwriting. On the last used page, he'd written something that made her breath catch. Truth is worth any price, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. After Jin left, Nora took the journal to her small home office. The room had changed in recent months. What had once been a space for paying bills and occasionally working from home was now covered in bulletin boards and file boxes, her own investigation center. She opened a drawer and pulled out a folder labeled Foundation, where she kept track of the ongoing investigations into other parts of the conspiracy. The trials might be over for those directly responsible for Thomas's death, but the web of corruption he'd uncovered spread much further. 28 people had been indicted so far, including 2 state senators and a federal judge. The U.S. Attorney's Office had frozen millions in assets. And it had all started with one student asking questions about financial discrepancies in a university foundation. Nora pinned a newspaper clipping to the bulletin board, the announcement of the first Thomas Chen Memorial Scholarship recipient, a young woman named Lian Wu, who had written an expose on housing discrimination that had led to policy changes at the city level. "She reminds me of you," Vivian had said when they read about Lian. Same determination. Next to the clipping, Nora pinned a flyer for the Thomas Chen Center for Investigative Support, the nonprofit she was establishing with some of the settlement money from the university. The center would provide resources and forensic assistance to families questioning the circumstances of a loved one's death. Outside, spring rain tapped gently against the windows. Nora made more tea and settled into the small desk chair. She opened her laptop and began typing an email to Detective Wilson about a case he'd mentioned. A family in the next county questioning their daughter's supposed accidental drowning. As she worked, she felt Thomas's presence in the room, not in a ghostly way, but in the purpose that now drove her forward. His death had created ripples that continued to spread, touching lives and bringing hidden truths to light. The small desk clock showed 2:17 a.m. when Nora finally closed her laptop. She was tired but satisfied with the day's progress. Justice had been served, but her work wasn't finished. Thomas's legacy would continue through the scholarship, through the center, and through her own transformed life. She paused at his bedroom door on the way to her own. "We did it, kiddo," she whispered. "They can't hurt anyone else now." 1 year after opening Thomas's coffin and discovering the truth, Nora stood at his grave with fresh flowers. The cemetery was peaceful, birds singing in the old oak trees that provided dappled shade. "You would have been 20 today," she said softly. "I brought your favorite chocolate cake even though I know that's silly." She sat on the small bench beside the headstone which read, "Thomas Chen, beloved son, seeker of truth." "The center helped 3 families last month," she continued, as if they were having one of their regular catch-up talks. "And Lian is doing amazing work with her investigative podcast." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. "I miss you every day. But I'm doing what you would have wanted. Making sure the truth comes to light, no matter how powerful the people trying to hide it." She placed her hand on the cool stone. "You changed the world, Thomas. Not in the way either of us would have chosen, but you did." As she walked back to her car, Nora's phone rang. The center's hotline.